Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
Doing right. Apparently, third time was not the charm.
Nope,
Here we're hoping that fourth time is the charm as we restart our recording here.
Yeah, that's how the
little
goes,
peek
right?
behind the curtain.
Yes, check out The Wizard of Oz. But anyway, we are here today with our first episode of the off-season, talking about a little bit, just a little bit of reflection on the past season for the Green Bay Packers. We'll be talking about what went right, and then we'll be looking forward a little bit about what needs to go better next year for Green Bay to, climb that ladder. So we are here, and if you like what you hear, please consider subscribing, whether that's, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. We're on every single platform, so check them out. Leave a comment, leave a review. We would really appreciate it. Tell a friend, because we will be here for the entire offseason. Yes, just because the Packers season ended, earlier than all of us would have hoped, we are still going to be here. We'll be talking about the draft, talking about free agency, talking about coaching hires, talking about offseason OTA programs, looking forward to, talking about, hey, who do we expect to make a jump this year? Who do we need more from this year? We'll be doing an episode every single week throughout the offseason. So just because the Packers season is done, we are still just getting started. We love the NFL draft specifically. We'll be doing a lot of focus on that, talking about, what players fit, the Packers' usual parameters for certain positions, what players don't, who is rising up draft boards, who is falling down draft boards, talking about the Senior Bowl, talking about the Shrine Bowl, talking about the NFL Draft Combine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So please consider checking us out, whether that's, on any of those platforms, please subscribe. Like we mentioned, really appreciate it. But today, like I mentioned, we are going to kind of use this episode as a bit of a transition from last season to next season as we talk about looking back, fondly and maybe not so fondly about some things that went well, some things that didn't go well. But yeah, Dad, any thoughts on that as we're kind of transitioning into our off-season program, shaking off the rust of last, it's almost like two different podcasts practically, where we're, in season, we kind of have a set formula where we're doing our pre-games, our post-games, and then off season, it's a little bit more free flowing.
Free form, because in season, there's a structure to every podcast. Off season, who knows what we're going to do. And I actually ended up doing more research off season because I don't have this stuff I have to do to go over the games coming up or past. So let's just go down a rabbit hole.
Exactly. And there's more research because there's more when in season, it's I have games to talk about. I have actual on the field stuff to talk about. And the off season, it's okay, well, let me go watch 50 different edge players, all of the snaps I can find of them, and just tell you what I think of each of them, and go through all of their, RAS profiles, go through all the RAS profiles of all the other, edge players the Packers have taken, go through all, hey, this guy hit this measurement in the vertical jump. The Packers haven't taken a edge player with that vertical jump in the last 10 years, stuff like that. But today, like I mentioned, go ahead.
And I've been already doing mock drafts. I think I'm up to 20 or so. So you do a round, you see who's available. Then you flip over from the mock draft to some YouTube videos or some
cut-ups that people have been graciously posting online, some all-22 stuff.
Do that, yeah.
Oh, yeah, shout out to those
guys.
To
see, those can fool you, though. It's oh, yeah, everybody looks good in a highlight reel.
Oh, yeah, but that's why you got to find the cut-ups of the all-22 stuff. Where you got to
find a whole game against good, if you can.
Or you find every single one-on-one rep from the Senior Bowl, which a lot of people post, which are always very good.
Senior Bowl is one of the I feel like one of the most informative things. That's where, Evan Williams came from.
Exactly. That's where a lot of Packers players have come from, whether it's, Evan Williams was at the Senior Bowl. Christian Watson was at the Senior Bowl.
Dobbs at the Senior Bowl. They both had, really good on-field speeds at the Senior Bowl. And
Luke Musgrave was at the Senior Bowl.
At the Senior Bowl. Musgrave had the fastest on-field tight end speed ever.
Exactly, at the Senior Bowl. So, et cetera, down the line. We'll be talking to you all about, Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl, draft, free agency, all of that. But today we're going to, kind of do a little bit of like we mentioned, talking about the 2024 season, looking forward to the 2025 season through the lens of the 2024 season. But before we get to any of that, we do have one piece of news to touch on, and that is that the Packers have made one coaching change with the end of the 2024 season, and that is that they have let go of defensive line coach Jason Rebrovich. He had previously been the pass rush specialist with the Packers, and then this past year was promoted to defensive line coach. It was his first year in the position, and, for the most part, the defensive line kind of underperformed over the course of the year. So they have decided to move on there, and they're currently looking at other options. Reportedly, they have interviewed 3 people so far, and haven't made a decision. So there will probably be more interviews going forward. But so far, the interviews that they have had are Aaron Whitecotton, who was the Jets defensive line coach this past year. Overall, the Jets have had a good defensive line under him. He had previously coached with Robert Saleh, so there is at least some familiarity there, given the fact that Saleh had been a consultant with the Packers. Just some numbers for you. While he was with the Jets this past year, the Jets ranked per NFL Pro on non-blitzes, so removing all snaps with blitzes, 3rd in pressure rate, 26th in time to throw, and 22nd in time to pressure. And then in the run game, they were 2nd in yards before contact per attempt and 17th in stuff rate. So that's him. The second person that they have interviewed is Casey Rogers, who has been the Buccaneers defensive line coach and run game coordinator. He is a free agent coach, so with Whitecotton, obviously, they're going to bring in a whole new staff, so he's going to be moving on. Casey Rogers, on the other hand, they still have that staff in place in Tampa Bay, so it sounds like the Packers are maybe just trying to, be like, hey, we'll pay you more money. Please come over here. I think it's a little unlikely given the fact that he has coached with Todd Bowles, both with the Jets and with the Buccaneers, so he has followed him through multiple stops. I would be surprised if the Packers are able to pry him away. But Casey Rogers...
It's a lateral move as well. It's not a promotion.
Yeah. Exactly. And honestly, maybe even a backwards move, given the fact that he is the Bucs defensive line coach and run game coordinator. I don't know if he would get both titles with the Packers. Obviously, I think, for me at least, he would be the premier candidate there that the Packers have interviewed so far of these 3. The Buccaneers ranked 19th in pressure rate, but 4th in time to throw and 6th in time to pressure. So the quality of their pressures were better than the quality of the Jets' pressures. And then in the run game, 24th in yards before contact per attempt and 6th in stuff rate. And then the third and final person that we know that they have interviewed so far is Eric Washington, who was the Bears defensive coordinator this past year. On non-blitzes, the Bears ranked 6th in pressure rate, 30th in time to pro, 29th in time to pressure. And then in the run game, 26th in yards before contact per attempt and 26th in stuff rate. So those are the 3 people that the Packers have interviewed for that position so far. I would expect there will be more going forward. In terms of availability, Whitecotton and Washington both do not have positions right now. Casey Rogers, it would be a little bit hard to pry him away from the Buccaneers, I think. But Dad, any thoughts on those 3 guys? Any thoughts on moving on from Rebrovich? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think if you look at the numbers that you're going to talk about later, and as well as I looked at a predicted weighted PFF grade for the position groups of what we thought we were going to get going into the season and what we ended up getting. The edge and interior defensive line both were the most underperforming groups on the team.
Yeah, and they definitely expected more from the defensive line, and it was definitely a weak spot of the defense. You invest a lot of capital there with Gary, first-round pick, Lucas Van Ness, first-round pick, Kenny Clark, first-round pick, Devontae Wyatt, first-round pick. You have 4 different first-round picks along that defensive line, and still don't get a lot out of those guys. Not many guys had career years. Most guys had career down years, and so kind of makes sense that they decided to make that move. But we'll keep you updated on who they end up hiring there and what that means for the Packers. So, just stay tuned on that. But Dad, anything else you wanted to touch on that, or should we get into talking about 2024 and 2025?
Well, one other thing, just to mention that's sort of Packers adjacent, the Jets have hired Aaron Glenn from the Lions, so they will not be hiring Hafley.
Yes, that was one thing we were a little bit worried about. Hafley did get a head coach interview with the Jets, along with 17 other people. They had a ridiculous interview list, just in terms of the size of it, not in terms of who they interviewed, but they interviewed 20 people, which is a bit, out of the ordinary. But Hafley was interviewed for that head coaching spot. I was a little bit worried that he was going to blow him away in the interview because he is, really impressive on the microphone and has head coaching experience with Boston College, led a pretty impressive defensive unit with the Packers this year. But yes, they're going with Aaron Glenn, previously defensive coordinator of the Lions. And so it's almost all but guarantees that Hafley will be back as defensive coordinator in 2025, which is a very good thing for Green Bay.
I did not want to have to start over because we seem to be trending in the right direction.
Especially because we finally got an assistant coach hire right. I mean, my goodness, we were batting 0 for 8 at this point. The coordinator hires have not been Matt LaFleur's strong suit as his time in Green Bay, to be fair.
No,
he does a lot of things well, but
he should let somebody else do that.
Yeah, he's done a lot of things well, but that has not been one of them. But so far, it looks like Hafley has been a really good hire, and glad that he didn't get hired away almost instantaneously after 1 year with Green Bay. But that is a good thing to note. That it sounds like he's going to be back in 2025, all but guaranteed with him not getting that Jets job. Obviously would have been excited for him if he did, but I am equally excited that he did not. But yeah, so with that, let's start talking, though, about, the 2024 Green Bay Packers. Bit of a postmortem, bit of an autopsy, bit of a memorialization of the 2024 Green Bay Packers. We hardly knew ye. But, Dad, let's start off with, some positives. And let's talk a little bit because, I know with the season ending how it did, losing in the wild card round, not how anyone wanted it to go. But there's still some positives to take away from this season and some things that you hope that they can carry into next season because this team still won 11 games. This team still made the playoffs. This team still had a very good year and, didn't play the Eagles as tight as you would have liked, but it is what it is. But let's start off with some of those positives, Dad. What are some things that you think the Packers in 2024 did well and can hopefully carry into next season?
So I'll start. I have something on offense and something on defense. So I'll start with what they did well on offense. So one of the things I have, and there are a lot of other things, and you have some, avoiding sacks.
Yeah.
Jordan Love had the third lowest pressure to sack percentage in the league, behind only Derek Carr and Josh Allen. Love's percentage was 9.3%, according to PFF. Green Bay had the third lowest sack percentage in the league, according to NFL Pro, only behind Buffalo and Denver. And they had the third lowest adjusted sack percentage, adjusted for opponent, according to FTN Fantasy. They also gave up the fourth slowest time to pressure in the league, according to NFL Pro, behind only Baltimore, Kansas City, and Pittsburgh. And this was despite being blitzed at the second highest rate in the league. So they did, slowed down pressures and did not let many of those get turned into sacks. And also that led to their total offensive line grade, snap adjusted that I looked at, being a little bit better than predicted going into the season. So that was what I had positive on the offense. How about you? Have you want to go back and forth to?
Yeah. I was just gonna touch on a little bit. In terms of sack avoidance, I think that is one of the things that Love does best. And going into next year, just peeking at that, a lot of this offensive line should be back. The only free agent is Josh Myers in that center spot. It does sound, from Brian Gutekunst's presser, his end of season presser, that they have some interest in bringing him back. It seems like something where, it kind of probably depends on the contracts he gets other places. It kind of is a bit reminiscent of the John Runyon situation last year, where they had interest in bringing John Runyon back, and then they were outbid by the Giants in terms of what they were willing to pay. I wouldn't be surprised though, because Brian Gutekunst mentioned, how they think of him in the locker room, how they think of him in terms of, he actually went out of his way to mention, Jordan Love is very comfortable with him as his center. He mentioned the relationship between, Jordan Love and Josh Myers there. They trust him to make the calls. And, he has not been great in Green Bay. I don't want to, look at this all through rose-colored glasses. Just briefly touching on the rest of them. I think it's safe to say Walker will probably be your left tackle. Tom is probably going to be your right tackle still. Probably still Elton Jenkins at left guard unless he moves to center. And then Sean Ryan had a good year at right guard, and he's still under contract as well. But focusing back on Myers for a second, has not had probably as good of a rookie contract with Green Bay as you would like. But I would say at the start of this year, he was playing his best football. And then it sounds like per him, he had a bit of a pec tear. Not a major pec tear that would knock you out for the season, but enough of a one to probably compromise him in some ways. He played through it. And then, he wasn't very good the second half of the year. Now, it's a bit tough to, only attribute that to that injury, given the fact that, for his first 3 years, he was also not great at that center spot. But there is a world where you bring him back next year. He plays like he did in the first half of this season, and he's a really solid starting center for Green Bay. That's not out of the question. And so just to kind of wind this back to what you were talking about in terms of avoiding sacks, Jordan Love, that's something he does great. He's been, on one of the best quarterbacks the past 2 years in terms of pressure to sack rate, not letting pressures convert to sacks. And then even if you don't bring back Myers, you're bringing back 4 of 5 starting linemen who did a pretty good job pass protecting this year. Now, run blocking is a bit of a different thing, but we'll talk about that a bit later. But 4 guys who did a really good job pass protecting this year, and then inserting a first round, guy who didn't get a lot of snaps this year, but looked okay when he did, in Jordan Morgan, who they were clearly high of coming out of the draft. So I think either way, you feel pretty good about some version of a starting 5 next year being a good pass protecting unit, and then Jordan Love being able to avoid sacks. So I think that is something that they did really well in 2024, and something that they continue to do well going into 2025, right?
Yeah, and just I was looking up some of the Josh Myers numbers. So you talk about how he was doing well in the first half. So his first half of the season pass blocking grade was like 9 points higher than what he ended up for the season.
Yeah.
And that news about that was news to me about the pec tear that he was, trying to play. They basically played through for much of the second half of the year. I don't know what week it came up. So that may be why he went down. So maybe we could have higher hopes and expectations for him if he does come back. They did seem to make a lot of. I've heard a lot of people talking about how like the connection he has with Love. They're making a lot of putting a lot of emphasis on that, and maybe with the snapping that they had at in that wild card game without him.
Yeah. And the when they had Ryan play center, and it was a bit of an adventure. I thought you were initially talking about the snapping when Elton had to play center in that game against the Lions. That was the one I was thinking of. Exactly. And this was reported. I forget exactly who had the initial report, but it was this I'm finding via Forbes.com right now is that Myers played the final 6 games of the year with a torn pectoral minor. And didn't end up having to leave the field. That was I don't remember who that was initially reported by, but it could be that had something to do with it. But in terms of what I had as a positive on the offensive side, if you want to pivot to that, anything else you wanted to say about the offensive line or just sack avoidance in general? But
yeah, so those last 6 games of the year,
his worst games, I'm guessing.
His pass blocking grade was 20 points lower than the first 9 games of the year.
Yeah, which it is. You can't make an entire excuse because it's not like he had been fantastic his first 3 years in Green Bay, but there is at least something there where it's like, hey, maybe you bring him back next year, maybe he's better. For me, though, the thing that I wanted to highlight that the Packers did really well that you hope that they can do well next year on offense is the run game. Once again, under Matt LaFleur, the Packers were a very good running team. 12th in success rate, 13th in EPA per carry, 6th in yards per carry, 5th in rushing yards over expectation, the 5th most carries over 10 yards. So they were a very explosive running game as well. Overall, they did a lot of different kinds of runs. Well, a lot of it had to do with how well Josh Jacobs played, and the acquisition of him over the offseason was a grand slam home run, 10 out of 10. The Packers...
When your running back is getting yak all the time, it kind of doesn't matter where he's going. He's just breaking the tackles wherever he's going.
Yes, and that's yards after contact in this context, yes, not yards after catch. Although he did a little bit of that too, but the Packers were 4th in the league in yards after contact per attempt, and it was a very diverse running game as well. Per FTN Fantasy, 31% of their runs were inside zone. That was the 7th highest rate. 21% were outside zone. That was the 13th highest rate of outside zone. 8% of them were power. That's 18th highest, and then 4.2% were counter runs, which was 7th highest. So, they were the lowest, percentage of like any type of run that they had was still middle of the pack in the league. They were a very diverse run game, and they did most of these types of runs very well. In terms of inside zone, they were 10th in yards per carry. Outside zone, they were 8th in yards per carry. Power runs, they were 14th in yards per carry, and then counter runs, they were 9th in yards per carry. So it didn't really matter what kind of runs they were doing. They were doing a really good job doing it, and a lot of that did have to do with Josh Jacobs, because I think overall, over the course of the year, their run blocking wasn't great. Some numbers to support that were they were only 16th in yards before contact per attempt. 20th inside the tackles, 9th outside the tackles. And specifically, they were really bad at short runs. In terms of 3rd and 1 or 2 or less, the Packers ranked 28th in success rate. And then 4th and short, they ranked 25th. So
this has been kind of their bugaboo for several years now.
Yeah, it's not being able to get those short yards.
They're at the goal line, they just can't move the pile. I feel like they had more plays where they have pushed a couple yards downfield instead of, we made it by like a quarter of an inch. Yeah, or we did make it.
Exactly. And so I think just kind of tying all that together, there is areas where they can improve in the run blocking game, and they need to improve in that 3rd and 4th and short. But the fact that they were so good at so many different types of runs, and that Josh Jacobs had such a good year, if you just give him a little bit better run blocking, imagine just how good this run game could be. Because a lot of it was, okay, Josh Jacobs break 3 tackles. Okay, you have a really good misdirection schemed up by Matt LaFleur where they had that spinner series stuff throughout the course of the year that was really, really good. And I do think that they could do a better job of tying that stuff into the passing game. It felt like that stuff felt like a bit siloed from what they were doing otherwise. And Matt LaFleur talked about over the course of the year, not over the course of the year. He talked about at the end of the year, they asked him, why are you doing so much stuff out of shotgun? It's like, well, our numbers say that we're way better running out of shotgun than we are under center. And he was 100% correct. The yards per carry under shotgun or out of shotgun rather, were way better than the yards per carry under center. And so they need to find a way to run better under center. They need to find a way to run better in short yardage situations, which I think kind of ties into that under center stuff. But for the most part, this was a really good run game. And you can see places where improvements should be, you should be able to improve. If, Josh Myers can come in healthy next year, if they want to bring him back, or if, you're able to shuffle the offensive line where Elton's at center and then you get some good play out of Morgan, you could see a scenario where the offensive line is better at run blocking next year. Josh Jacobs doesn't have to carry as much weight on his shoulders. You get a little bit more push up front. You're better in those 3rd and 4th and shorts. You're able to, have some more running lanes before contact for your running backs. And so when they're breaking tackles, they're not breaking tackles in the backfield. They're breaking tackles 3 to 4 yards downfield. And it was already a really good run game, even with, several different deficiencies. And so that's somewhere where they were good at this in 2024. I could see them being even better at it in 2025. And so that's something I'm excited about going forward.
Yeah, I mean, we saw how much work Jacobs can do to get yards on his own. So we can just, open up a few more holes. I think Sean Ryan is maybe showing some ability, and Zach Thomas turned into a good run blocker.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to shore up a little bit more on the other spots and get a little bit more push downfield.
Exactly. But what is something positive that you think that the Packers did on the defensive side of the ball? Now, just kind of moving forward, where you think that they could maybe carry that into next year.
Got a couple short notes here. The tackling, after being like a terrible, tackling team for a couple years, they're the 4th best tackling grade in the league per PFF, behind only Kansas City, New England, and Detroit.
Yeah,
and I was looking through the numbers to try to figure out, what it was, and so one thing that came out, I think the players, and I don't remember who they had, like the highest missed tackle percentage on the team. So out of like 500 defensive players, the ones in like the bottom quarter or maybe even the bottom 10th, were players that did not actually have that, who were members of the Packers who were in that bottom 10%, say, did not have that many tackle attempts.
Mm-hmm.
So the most of the players who had a lot of tackles were in like the top quarter of the league in missed tackle percentage.
So essentially our bad tacklers were part-time players, and they were really bad tacklers, is what you're saying. I mean, it's like they had 10 chances at it, and they missed like 3.
Right. So the players who were contributing the most tackles were generally good tacklers. Like Quay Walker was quite good, McKinney.
Mm-hmm. And players who
Stokes actually had a good tackling grade this year. I think we've had some, basically players making most of the tackles being generally good at it. And so we ended up with a good team tackling grade overall.
Yeah, and, those are some players who have historically been good tacklers. Quay Walker's been a good tackler since his time at Georgia. Xavier McKinney has been a good tackler his entire career in the NFL. I will say, I don't know if you remember this, but the first year under Joe Barry, we were like one of the greatest tackling teams of all time. And then just fell apart the next 2 years. Just completely collapsed and couldn't tackle anyone the next 2 years. So I will say, it's not guaranteed to stick to next year. But the fact that those tacklers, the best tacklers that we have proven to be good tacklers, is at least, something hopeful that can carry into 2025.
Yeah, you remember all the stories in Joe Barry's first spring practices about how he was like, diving on the donut and showing him how to tackle, and and it
worked,
paid off that first year,
and then it didn't the rest south. Of them. Yeah, so that is just something that we have seen good tackling in the first year of a defensive coordinator before, and then seen it kind of fade a little bit down the stretch. But hopefully, these coming years, it does not, and that would be huge for the Packers defense. For me, something that I wanted to highlight that the Packers, I feel like, finally did well for the first time in forever is, I mean, how long has it been since we had a run defense this good? We finally had a good run defense this past year after years of being one of the bottom run defenses in the league. And this was something that has apparently been an emphasis of Jeff Hafley. He said in, I can't remember which presser it was, but he pretty much was like, I don't believe you can have a good defense if you can't stop the run. And I was like, wow, what a take. I love to hear it. The Packers
instead of just ignoring it.
Exactly. Just some numbers for you on that. In 2023, the Packers were 16th in rushing success rate allowed. In 2024, they moved all the way up to 9th. In 2023, they were 22nd in EPA per carry allowed. This year, they were 8th in EPA per carry allowed. 2023, they were 23rd in yards per carry allowed. This year, they were 3rd in yards per carry allowed, a 20 spot increase. In 2023, they were 15th in stuff rate, and this year they were 8th in stuff rate. And they were pretty good at defending a wide variety of runs. Inside zone, they were 9th in yards per attempt. These numbers are per FTN Fantasy. Outside zone, they were 10th in yards per attempt. Power, they were 21st, but they only saw the 23rd highest rate of those runs. They didn't see power very much. And then counter, they were...
Why?
Yeah, I know. Thank you, I guess. And then counter, they were 7th in yards per attempt. So they were really good at defending a lot of different types of runs. Next year, maybe they'll see a little bit more power and teams will make them prove that they can stop that. But
I do have a little thing to add. I don't know if you've got this. So looking at NFL Pro, they had the 3rd fewest yards before contact on run plays on the season, behind only Miami and the Jets.
Yeah, and that is one thing where it's like, hey, in defense of Jason Rebrovich, while the defensive line, did not rush the passer very well, they did do a very good job against the run. And so that's something where they're going to have to continue that next year. And it's also going to be a little bit difficult continuing that next year with probably losing TJ Slayton to free agency. It kind of seems like that might be a tough player to keep, just in terms of he might garner some more interest from some other teams, and the Packers have some other priorities and already have a lot invested along their defensive line and are probably going to want a guy who can, play the run and the pass a little bit more. But when Slayton was on the field, he was a fantastic run defender. And so it is going to be something where the defensive line, with a coaching change and losing one of their better run defenders, is going to have to carry that into 2025, where they're still going to be able to have to be able to play the run and also improve in the pass as well. So it's not going to be an easy task, but that is something where hopefully they can continue this run defense into 2025, because it did feel good to finally not just get gashed in the run game over and over and over again.
Yeah, they don't have any real big space eater on their roster right now. There's nobody
with Slayton leaving,
like Slayton if he ends up going somewhere else.
The closest thing to it is Kenny, and he's not even as big as Slayton.
He's still a good 20 or more pounds less than Slayton, and
exactly
is not as strong a run defender as he was earlier in his career.
Yeah, and hopefully he can have a bounce back season next year. That would just be so huge for the defense. But, a year older, it's not a guarantee. But in terms of, things that we're hoping for next year, I'm just hoping that this run defense can continue. So anything else on the positives that happened in 2024 that you're excited for 2025, Dad? Or should we start talking about some things that, hey, they got to clean this up for next year or else there are going to be some problems?
Sort of I had the defending the deep ball. So per NFL Pro, Green Bay led the league in EPA per pass on passes over 20 yards and gave up the 2nd fewest yards per play on passes over 20 yards. And by DVOA, Green Bay was 2nd best in the league at defending the deep ball, behind only the Eagles.
And a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that you added 3 really good safeties. Adding in, Xavier McKinney along the back line, a lot of, Jeff Hafley made sure to say, because there was that point in the middle of the year where it's like, oh, McKinney's not getting as many picks as he got you because started the year so hot, like on such a crazy streak there. And he's like, oh, and he's like, yeah, but that's just because no one's throwing deep on us anymore. No one wants to test that anymore. And so a lot of that has to do with the play of him and Evan Williams, both of them defending, the back line of the field just so well. And, hopefully, they can continue to limit those explosive plays deep, because it did feel like, that first game of the year, we got a little bit, slippery field. And then beyond that, didn't really get hit deep much the rest of the season.
No, and you say like, yeah, we remade the safety room. McKinney had a fantastic year and kind of revamped that whole back end of the defense. And Evan Williams looked really good. But we put in Zane Anderson, Oladapo, and the defense still held up on the back end. It's like, Hafley really knows how to coach that secondary to get it to perform well as a unit. And we were down to we're missing our best cover corner for a good chunk of the year. And we're going with Nixon and Valentine and Stokes and Bullard as our primary corners, essentially.
Yeah, and that, for those of you who don't know, that was what Hafley coached before he was a defensive coordinator and before he was a head coach. He was a defensive backs coach, a secondary coach. And so, that's his specialty. And like you mentioned, Oladapo comes in week 18, looks great as a safety. Zane Anderson, career special teamer, comes in against, multiple playoff level teams. Looks great. And so
I mean, with Hafley coaching, Zane Anderson looks so good. We're like, what are we going to do without Zane Anderson this week?
Yeah, exactly. And so, part of that maybe is, on the flip side of that is like, dang, we couldn't get Bullard to working at safety. But hey, if Bullard's a slot corner and he looked pretty good at slot corner, I'm fine with that too. Slot corner is still a very important position, and I've been screaming for years that we need a guy in the nickel who's actually a playmaker there. So hopefully, a full year of Bullard focusing on that spot can really help. But yeah, like you mentioned, Packers have been really good at defending the deep ball this year, and they're going to need to do that again next year, and they have the pieces to do that. So that's something that hopefully can carry over to next year because they still are returning, all the safeties that they had this year. And so that's going to be really exciting. But Dad, let's move on to some things that, maybe Green Bay didn't do as well, some stuff that the Packers just need to improve on if they're going to be as good as we want them to be next season rather. And I think the number one thing, also next game. I think the number one thing though has to be they need to figure out what's wrong with this pass rush. We talked about it all season long, so I'm not going to chew your ear off, but Packers were 20th in pressure rate, 20th in time to throw allowed, and 19th in time to pressure. So, bottom third pass rushing unit overall over the course of the season in pretty much any way you want to look at it. And this was really a big reason that they moved on from Rebrovich. Specifically where they really struggled was at the edge rusher position. And part of that is, moving from a 3-4 to a 4-3. Your edge rushers have different responsibilities. And a lot of times, you'd like to have different body types. So just some numbers for PFF. They were actually 9th in win rate amongst interior defensive line groups. So, looking at every team's interior defensive lines and looking at the number of times those guys had, wins on pass rushes versus the number of pass rush opportunities they had the 9th highest win rate amongst interior defensive lines there. Looking at edge groups, though, all the way down at 24th in win rate amongst edge rushers as a whole unit. And then amongst 158 edge rushers with at least 41 pass rushes, Brenton Cox was 24th in win rate. Rashawn Gary, though, was 55th. Aaron Mosby was 88th. LVN was 90th. And Enigbari was 120th. So the majority of the guys in the far bottom half of the league, Gary, who you're paying like a top 15, top 20 guy, was, 55th, behind a lot of guys there. And it's a bit tough because, you've invested so much of that position. They've asked Brian Gutekunst about whether or not they want to get smaller there. A lot of people have already talked about, people smarter than me have talked about how, a lot of these 4-3 systems have smaller, bendier guys who are able to turn the corner there, guys who are more in that 240-pound range, who are more, pass rush specialist, edge guys who aren't going to necessarily bull rush guys, but are going to try and get around the edge and kind of, just beat the tackle around the hoop. And the Packers don't really have that. And Brian Gutekunst talked about this last season. They asked him about it, and he said, when you start to get small and you start picking some small guys, you get small in a hurry. And he doesn't want, the defense to suddenly look around and it's like, oh, shoot, we're too small to defend the run. We're too small to, match up with these big hulking offensive linemen. At the same time, though, it might be time this offseason to kind of take a peek at the approach at that edge rusher position because it just wasn't good enough this season from those guys, despite a lot of investment at those spots. You got Gary, who you're paying a massive contract, LVN, who you sunk a first-round pick into, and your most productive guy was an undrafted free agent. And so you just kind of need more from that edge rusher position. And you also need more on your blitzes. They just were not good at blitzing this year. And it's something where, they need to find a way to affect the quarterback. On blitzes, they did have a high pressure rate. They were third highest in the league in pressure rate on their blitzes, but 25th in sack rate. They only had 7 sacks on blitzes and 8 touchdowns allowed on blitzes. So you're creating fewer negative plays than you're allowing, big explosive plays the other way. You let them hold the ball even when you did blitz. They had the 16th highest time to throw allowed on blitzes. So the sacks that they were getting and the pressures that they were getting weren't even getting there very quick. And overall just weren't good enough. They had the 6th worst EPA per dropback when blitzing in the league. You just have to find a way to affect the passer better in 2025. And I think that starts with, getting better edge rushers that maybe suit the scheme better. Having guys, maybe another year in the scheme is able to, have them play better. Specifically, I'm looking at Gary there because I still think Gary's a good player. I think, you just need to get more out of him next year. And then I think, maybe adding a body or two there that maybe fits this 4-3 better. And then also just finding out what kind of blitzes work well for you, because this year, when they weren't able to get pressure with 4, they weren't able to get pressure with more than 4 either, really. Like, there was just nothing they could do to affect the passer in a consistent way. And I think that is the number one thing that needs to change on the defense. And I think overall, going to next year.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know if you tried to split out those blitzes, whether it mattered where somebody was blitzing from, safety, corner,
And
or linebacker.
We did talk about this where it did feel like they didn't blitz their secondary guys very much. When they blitzed, they were sending Cooper, Walker, or McDuffie, but they did not seem to like sending their corners that much.
Yeah, in terms of actual pass rush snaps, or there's like 4 for McKinney, 3 for Bullard. Well, that's the second half of the year. But still, second half of the year, it wasn't changing that much.
Exactly. Yeah, it didn't feel like they sent those guys at all. And I can understand not wanting to send McKinney in terms of, hey, he's like really integral to what you're doing on the back end. But there's no reason I couldn't see Bullard being a really dynamic piece there. Like, he's a high level attacking athlete. Like, that should be something he should be really good at. I don't think there's any reason you shouldn't be able to send Quiche on there. Like, Bullard's the one where I think most, like, he makes sense because he's your slot guy. He's aggressive. He's a good tackler. He's really explosive. I feel like you could send him more.
He did have 17 on the year, but what I say, only 4 on the second half of the year.
Yeah,
it's like they started to get away from it more as the season went on.
I think maybe they just started getting away from blitzing in general because they were just getting crushed on all their blitzes. But yeah, so that's the thing I think on defense that needs to change the most is they need to find a way to affect the passer. I mean, this league is built on the passing game. You need to be able to throw the ball. You need to have a quarterback that's making plays, and you need to be able to prevent the other team's quarterback from making plays. And where that starts is on heating them up, and the Packers just didn't do a good enough job of that this year. And going into next year, they need to find a way to do that. They need to add along that defensive line. They need better play from the edge rushers, and they need better coaching along the defensive line, which I think it is a good sign that they have, identified that as a problem as well and are trying to make some material changes there.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see a higher rate of pressure to sack conversion ratio than we've been getting. And I guess you could say that just admitting that you have a problem is one step in the right direction.
Yes, exactly. But anyway, what do you think needs to change on defense in terms of like what you had there? What are you focused on for the defense next year?
So I put in another thing we talked about during the year is coverage in the middle of the field.
Oh yeah.
So by DVOA, Green Bay was 7th worst in covering the short middle of the field. That's from FTN Fantasy. Green Bay also gave up the 3rd most yards per pass play on the intermediate passes, according to NFL Pro. So Walker and McDuffie led the linebacker group in coverage snaps on the year, but they were 66th and 74th in the league in coverage grade out of 87 qualifying players, and they had below average coverage grades of 50.6 for Walker and 46.4 for McDuffie. So in terms of hope for the future, Edgerrin Cooper was 5th in the league in PFF coverage grade.
Yeah,
amongst linebackers.
They just got to play them more.
So they just got to switch up those snaps, and I think we'll see some natural improvement there.
Yeah, and it's like he is your best blitzer, but I think the gap between him and Walker as blitzers is smaller than the gap between him and Walker as coverage guys, and same goes with McDuffie. And I think if Cooper can make a step next year, now that's something else that we've talked about is like, hey, we need some Packers players to actually develop over the course of their time in Green Bay. Too many guys have come in as rookies, looked good, and then not taken that second step. That's something that they can't afford to have happen going forward.
Yeah, we were making that list the other day. It's like the number of players who have actually improved significantly after their rookie year is like, okay, that guy's the same as he was as a rookie. Oh, that guy's got worse than he was as a rookie.
Yeah, it's like, okay, Stokes got worse since his rookie year, albeit, injuries, to be fair. I think Elton Jenkins doesn't look quite as good as he did, his second year, to be fair, injuries. Rashawn Gary doesn't look quite as good as he did, his third year, to be fair, scheme changed. Going down the list, we were like, well, Sean Ryan got better. Like, that's one. Zach Tom has gotten better. Jordan Love has gotten better. But you do go down the list and it's like, oh man, like they've had guys, come in and look good right away, but never quite taken that next step. You were waiting for Romeo Doubs to take that next step. You're waiting for Christian Watson to become the dynamic receiver that he could be, given his athletic potential. And, to be fair, again, injuries kind of waylaid that a little bit. But yeah, in terms of...
Yeah, and we've had players who got a little bit better or maybe weren't good and then got playable. We haven't had anybody go from, they're playing pretty good at the beginning and then becoming a star.
Yeah, and that's something we talked about when the Packers, lost to the Eagles. just not enough stars out there. And so they need some of these guys. And just to kind of circle back to what we were talking about, Cooper is one of those guys who has that star potential, and so they need him to take a next level jump because, like you mentioned, they need to be able to defend the middle of the field. There are too many teams that are good at attacking the middle of the field. Whether it's the Detroit Lions, you're going to have to be able to beat them. The San Francisco 49ers are probably going to, be able to bounce back from injuries next year. They love attacking the middle of the field. Okay. You look down and down the list, these good teams in the NFC and really around the league love attacking the middle of the field. You cannot just, that can't just be a free space. That can't just be easy.
Some of them have multiple players like Kittle and Debo go across the middle. You've got Laporta and Amon-Ra going across the middle. You got teams with good tight ends and a good receiver eating up the middle, and we're getting burned by Jonnu Smith and the Dolphins
along the middle of the field. Although Jonnu Smith had a good year, so maybe he's just really good. But yeah, that is definitely something that
so
the
maybe
Packers need to change.
That I will apologize, Jonnu Smith, that maybe you are better than Kyle Pitts.
He definitely might be. Actually, we might need to apologize to Arthur Smith also because, hey, maybe he knew something. But yeah, no, the Packers have to find a way to defend the middle of the field going forward into next year. Moving over to the offensive side of the ball, though, in terms of unless there's anything else you wanted to touch on defense.
I think the next thing I have is I have some offensive things.
Yeah,
offensive things.
Yeah, but moving on to the offensive side of the ball. I think the number one thing on that side of the ball is they need to be able to fix this passing game. It was far too disjointed all throughout the course of the year. And, EPA per play, the Packers had a really good passing offense, 7th in the league. But by success rate, they were only middling, 16th best in the league. And that's just kind of indicative of the fact that they were able to hit a lot of these big plays, but down to down, it really felt a little bit, herky-jerky. And I think part of that is they fell in love with the deep ball a little too much. Part of that is they just struggle with a lot of things. And it's a bit of a departure from last year where they were 4th in EPA per dropback and 11th in success rate. But I think really what the issue was is the quick game just was not good enough. And, a lot of that has to do with, I think, Love and LaFleur. They need to do a better job of doing this. And so looking at some numbers, in 2023 on throws less than 2.5 seconds, Jordan Love was 6th in the league in EPA per dropback. This year, in less than 2.5 seconds, he was 24th in the league in EPA per dropback. And you might say, wow, he was way better in 2023 than 2024. What happened? Well, actually, I think doing a deeper dive into the numbers, that's something that he struggled with both years. There's really something that this offense struggled with both years because we've seen him do it well at times. But the reason that the EPA per dropback was so good last year in throws under 2.5 seconds was he had 14 touchdowns and no picks on those types of throws. That's not exactly super sustainable. This year he had 13 touchdowns and 6 picks. So it's a bit of a regression back. Because when you look at some of the other numbers, last year he was 14th in dropbacks per game on those quick throws. This year he was 25th. So he didn't do it very much this year at all. And he was only middling in terms of attempts last year as well. But last year, 25th in completion percentage over expectation. This year, 30th. Last year, 29th in yards per attempt. This year, 30th. And so he really wasn't great at quick game stuff last year. It was just a lot of touchdowns on quick game and a lot of really goal line, quick fades, back shoulder balls to Romeo Doubs. We had a bunch of those last year that we didn't have this year that I think were kind of inflating that EPA per dropback number. And I think part of it is some of these throws could be made easier for him. Last year he was 14th in average separation and 7th in tight window percentage on these type of throws. This year he was 23rd in average separation and 12th in tight window throw percentage on these types of throws. So, he's having to throw to guys who are covered on these quick throws more than some of these other quarterbacks. But it really is something that I think he needs to get better at, and LaFleur needs to get better at, designing for him and designing for this offense. Because I think until they find a way to get this quick game offense going in a consistent manner, this passing offense is just going to feel hit or miss, home run or strikeout, a bit, deep ball or not much there. And I think in order for this offense to hit the heights that you really want it to, they got to be able to work that underneath game and work that intermediate zone and work some of this quick game stuff because, this past year it became a bit predictable. It's like, hey, they're going to run on first and second down, and then you're going to try and get him into third down, and Love's going to have to bail you out. And a lot of times Love would bail them out because he's able to avoid that sack. He's able to throw under pressure. He's able to, hit guys in the middle of the field. He's able to, throw to some tight windows, and he's aggressive in taking those shots. And also, I would like to see him get back to some of that aggression. I think the interception stuff might have spooked him a little bit in the beginning of the year, and he might have, been a little bit more hesitant than he needed to be in the second half of the season. I think when you actually look at his turnover-worthy play rate, I think he was just getting a bit unlucky with some of the, interception numbers that he was getting, and it would have regressed a little bit more naturally. But I think he, maybe, took his foot off the gas a little bit. I would like to see him say, hey, screw it, I'm just going to rip it. But I think just to circle back to
a little more Brett Favre.
Yeah, a little bit. But I think just to circle back to what I was saying, they need to find a way to get this quick game going, because we talked about it all year. The wide receiver screens were bad this year. Just absolutely awful. The only screens they really had going were the tight end ones to Kraft. Whether it's, quick game stuff, more to Kraft. Wouldn't hate to see some of that. And it definitely seems like any type of quick game stuff they have is just like a quick out. Like they don't run many, they don't run many in breaking.
It's like take a half step and throw a screen out to the wide receiver and hope that the defensive back isn't timing it to take it to the house the other way.
Yeah. And so, I just want to see LaFleur have a little bit more confidence in Love and the two of them to work together to manufacture a better quick passing game. But that I think is the number one thing that I think they need to get better at in terms of offense going into 2025.
Yeah, for me, I guess part of it is what I have is related a little bit. So the passing game against man coverage, the stories came out.
We talked about that.
We just play a man and don't think they can beat us. Then we can rush, a bazillion people and just go one-on-one on the outside. And according to, PFF, there were 106 qualifying wide receivers with 30 or more targets. Dobbs was 33rd in receiving grade versus man at 75.8, which is up from last year at 56.3. He was the best on the team this year. But he was the only one who improved. Watson was 35th at 75.3. Down from last year's 81.4 PFF grade, though he was 5th in the league in yards per route run. Against man, I think he was getting some deep shots. A lot of yards per reception. Wicks was 99th in the league at 58.3, down from 69.5 last year.
He just got to
catch
the ball.
Watson was down. Reed was 106th out of 106 in PFF grade against man coverage. With a 43.1 grade, dead last, which is down from 72.2 last year. So we had a precipitous drop. The only teams so if you think about who's the best receiver against man coverage on a team, only 4 teams had a lower best wide receiver against man coverage. The Bills, the Bears, the Steelers, and the Chiefs. But the Chiefs have Kelsey, who was, graded better than any, I think, of the Packers receivers against man coverage. So do they need to add somebody? Is there any hope for them to be like better more like in 2023 than they were in 2024?
I think part of it is that I would hope they get some natural regression in terms of drop rate, because the Packers had the worst drop rate in the entire league, the most drops in the entire league. Reed had a problem with drops. Wicks had a problem with drops. Watson had a problem with drops, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They could not get out of their own way on offense.
Yeah, did Reed lead the league
in drop rate? I think
in total drops.
Oh, that's a good question. I think it was rate, but that's a good question. But he was up near the top. Wicks was up near the top, and we know those other guys like Watson and Dobbs have struggled with drops as well at times.
Oh, Reed was one short of the lead.
Okay,
Yeah,
nice.
10
not quite the worst, but yeah, I would hope you get some regression upwards from that, because it would be hard to go last in the league twice in a row. And I do have some questions about some wide receiver coaching stuff, given the fact that they had a new guy there as well this year, and all those guys seem to get worse this past season. But in terms of whether or not they can get better at that, I think some of that has to do with, can they make an addition at wide receiver? Because I think we've already talked about this, coming off that Eagles loss. They're still a star short on offense as well as defense. We already talked about it on defense. They need another pass rusher. On offense, I think they need a go-to pass catcher. They need a guy who can beat man coverage, because I think, you looked at it this past year, they just didn't get enough from those guys. Now, whether that's adding a guy in free agency, whether or not that's taking a guy in the draft, I think I lean the free agency route, because I think it'd be a little bit hard to, be like, hey, rookie, I need you to carry the entire passing offense on your shoulders at times. I think that's a bit much to ask of a team that has high aspirations. But I think that's, in terms of looking forward to 2025, I think, additions in that room is probably the number one way that you're going to get better at that. And then hopefully just some natural regression from the guys and some natural progression from the guys that you have there, hopefully taking a step, because, Bit of a sophomore slump for Reed, bit of a sophomore slump for Wicks. Unfortunately, you're not going to have Watson for a big stretch of next year, which really sucks. And you hope that you're able to get him back sooner rather than later. But it sounds like maybe it was just the ACL for him and not significant other damage.
Have you heard more news?
His dad was putting some stuff out on the internet about how they think that it's just the ACL, I think was what he was saying. So hopefully that might...
Is he a Blue Sky?
I can't remember. But hopefully that can continue and he can get, better faster than we would have initially hoped and have a full recovery there. But yeah, so I think going forward to 2025, it's going to be about those guys getting better and maybe making an addition in that room.
Yeah, just need a rookie like Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, or, Brian Thomas Jr. or something like that, although it's not as good of a receiver class this season, so don't hold your breath on any of those. In terms of one last thing on the offensive side of the ball that I wanted to touch on that the Packers need to get better at, and this is also kind of coaching, they just need to be more aggressive on fourth down. You look at all these other teams. So in terms of fourth down aggression, the Packers quietly became one of the least aggressive fourth down teams in the league this year. Over the course of the whole season, including playoffs, the Packers had the 5th lowest go-for-it rate in the league in situations where you should be going for it. And those are situations where, this is per RBSDM, where there's you still have a greater than 20% win probability, or it's still the first quarter, where you're excluding the final 30 seconds, and where going for it stands to gain at least a full % of win probability. All other teams still alive in the playoffs rank in the top 11, their first, 9th, 10th, and 11th. And it's weird.
So who's first? It's not
Washington.
The Lions.
It's by far Washington. You know that they have an 83% conversion rate on fourth downs? They're converting fourth downs at a higher rate than Michael Jordan made free throws. It's absolutely absurd.
Oh, this is the conversion, not the how often they're going for it.
Oh, they're also going for it at a crazy rate. Yeah, no, they're also number one in go for it rate. But yeah, the Packers just are not going for it at a rate that's commensurate with how good their offense is, or with how aggressive they really should be. And it's weird because last season the Packers were the 10th most aggressive team. And even if you're like, okay, well, what about the games where Love was hurt? What about the games where Malik Willis was in, et cetera, et cetera? Even if you look at just post bye week and then not including week 18, so just when Love was healthy, the Packers were only 16th in their going for it rate. And so that's better, but still only middling in ideal scenario for them. They're still only going for it at a middling rate. And it kind of, ties back a little bit to, I think, the lack of confidence I feel like at times was, present in the coaching staff. I feel like they just need to, be like, hey, we're going to win or lose with our offense. We're just going to do it because we have faith in our guys. And I would like to see a little bit more of that, because you see it from the best teams in the league. And I think the genie is not going back in the bottle. Teams are only going to be getting more and more aggressive on fourth downs, and it's going to be hard to keep up with those best teams on fourth downs if you're not willing to go for it. You see how good these other offenses are when they have 4 downs every single time? It's a lot easier on an offense when you have 4 downs to get a first down. And so I do wonder a little bit, though, Dad. I want to know what you think about this. Do you think this has anything to do with the fact that they missed a few different fourth downs in the NFC divisional last year? That, maybe if they had taken the points, they would have won?
I would hope not. I mean,
I would hope not too, but I don't understand why they went from being such an aggressive fourth down team the past few years under LaFleur, and then this year, one of the most conservative teams in the league in terms of going for on fourth downs. They're taking the points on 4th and 2 at the 12-yard line. They're taking points on 4th and 4 at the 4, end goal in a key game against a top-level team. You can't be kicking. You're not going to win these games kicking field goals. And so that's something I think
3 for 7. Yeah, I actually feel like for top teams, the field goal is going to just start disappearing anywhere close.
Yeah, exactly. If you're past just go for it. 4 downs is huge, but that's kind of the last thing that I had in terms of where they need to get better next year. I think they just need the offensive coaching staff to be more aggressive and be more confident in their guys, because I did feel also, just to touch on some other stuff, I felt at times, they were not letting Love rip it. In terms of, it looked a little bit like at the end of the year how the passing offense looked at the start of last year, where it's like, hey, why are we not, taking these shots in the middle of the field? Why are we throwing, just we're either throwing go balls to the sidelines that we think are going to get caught or incomplete, or throwing quick little outs, or throwing little, we're not I just, would like to see more confidence in the offense. I would like to see that translate to going for it more on fourth down. And I think you see all these other top offenses be really aggressive on fourth down. And I think in order to keep up with them, you need to do that too. And so I want to see that in 2025.
Yeah, I think, have faith in your system.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I think they're just afraid of getting burned, or they feel like, oh, we're not doing well at this now, and so our chance on this particular fourth down and this particular game and this, go with the probability a little bit more.
Yeah. And then it looks like you had one last thing that you wanted to touch on before we get out of here. This was kind of pseudo looking forward to 2025, kind of pseudo looking back to 2024.
I do have one more thing for the offense.
Oh, you do have one more thing for the offense. Okay.
Scrambling by Love.
Oh, yes. That is a big thing that, that's another thing. You look at the quarterbacks who are left in the playoffs. Jaden Daniels, he likes to run. Josh Allen, he likes to run. Patrick Mahomes, one of the greatest scramblers we've seen, even though that's not necessarily the thing he is known for. He's still one of the best scramblers in the league. And then Jalen Hurts, he loves to run. You need to have a quarterback using his legs.
Yeah, so this year, Love only had 13 scrambles for 96 yards, which is, according to PFF, 28th in the league in yards and 29th in number of scrambles, and 25 total rushes on the year for only 83 yards. And his PFF rushing grade was only 58. So last year, Love scrambled 23 times instead of 13. Not super high, but a lot better. And was 15th in scrambled yards at 203 and 18th in number of scrambles. And he had 50 total rushes for 247 yards. His run grade still wasn't great, but he was producing a lot more. And it was still 59.5, just kind of similar to this year.
Yeah, and I think part of that,
much more willing to, and so I think this is one of those things where we weren't good at this year. I think we're going to see it come back to 2023 levels, and hopefully a little bit more.
Yeah, and the a big you can point at is he was hurt for good chunks of the season, and I think one play sticks out like a big red flashing light in my mind is the game against the Eagles this past final game of the season. He has open runway. He's stepping up into the pocket. He's about to run, and then he throws it to Emmanuel Wilson, who's covered. Incomplete. He could have ran for like 7-8 yards, but he throws it to Emmanuel Wilson. So the one thing is, I really hope he doesn't let the injuries that he had this year dissuade him from running. But we have seen in 2023, he has the ability as a scrambler. Now, even then, I think he needs to turn up the scrambling even from those times. But if he can get back to 2023 levels of scrambling, we'll take it. I would like to see him scramble even more than that. But yeah, you need to be able to create as a, runner with your legs. And I think that would, to tie back to what you were talking about earlier, would probably help them beat man coverage a little bit more too. Cause all these guys turning their backs. No one's looking at the quarterback. If he can get past that first wave of pass rushers, you can create some explosives that way. There's a lot of open field. And so reasons to think that can get better in 2025, hopefully more health for Jordan Love, hopefully more confidence in his body at that point. Hopefully he doesn't have, any like lingering thoughts about those injuries and he doesn't think about them and that's not keeping him from running. But yeah, that is definitely something they need to do better in 2025.
Yeah. So I'm hoping he'll be better at it. His legs will be better and they'll be more aggressive with it. What he got injured on was not a running play.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
It wasn't like they got in harm's way by running
the groin a little bit. The groin was like him scrambling to the sideline and trying to throw. But you're right. It wasn't like a running play.
His leg was probably also not right, and so it was more likely to get injury.
Fair.
Those conditions.
Yeah, but I think that is definitely a big thing that he needs to improve on going forward. Any last things that you wanted to touch on before we get out of here, though?
Yeah. So I had we talked about this. And it seems like, okay, Packers just need to get a stop, and we'll win the game. Can they do it?
Yep, this is something they got to get better at, too.
It doesn't seem very likely.
Is getting those stops at the end of games,
Are the Packers are they actually bad at getting late-game stops with the leader, when they have the lead or the game is tied? So I found, and so I was like, well, it looks bad, feels bad in the moment, but do all teams feel this way? And so I did find an article from Tom Risky and PFF from 2022, but he had looked at a couple of years of data. And I found this to be very interesting. It's like the last 3 minutes of the game is what he focused on compared to the rest of the game. When only a field goal is needed, teams score 46% of the time. When a touchdown is needed, teams still score a touchdown 31% of the time when they have a possession with 3 minutes left in the game. Now, these rates are 10% higher and 8.5% higher than non-late game situations. So
prevent defense. You got to love it.
Teams are much better at scoring when they absolutely have to. Now, these numbers are even greater when it's a top 8 offense that's trying to do the scoring. For top 8 offenses, when they need a field goal in do or die possessions, they get one 2/3 of the time. And when they need a touchdown, they score a touchdown half the time.
And I would not be surprised if those numbers are even higher now that the touchback is at the 30.
Yeah, so this is right. This was I couldn't find somebody who'd already done the analysis for me, and I didn't want to go through
every single team,
single team games, play chart to figure out how they did. I didn't have a way to automate it, so it'd just take me forever. And having a top 8 offense has a much bigger impact on that percentage than a top 8 defense trying to stop them. And this was even, a few years ago. So let's look at how the Packers did in that context. So if you're facing, trying to stop a touchdown, for example, or a field goal when, field goal, you get like almost half the time. And if it's a top offense, it's like 2/3 of the time. So looking at the time where the Packers were in sort of a one possession game, and some of these have stretched a little bit, so they're not always sort of like end game drive. And we're going backwards now, I think, in the season. Right? Bears can't get a stop for a field goal to win the game at the end of the season. Bears only 27th by offensive DVOA. Not one of the good ones. Can't stop Minnesota from getting the first down. So this is a little different where they needed to get a 3 and out to get the ball back for a chance to score against Minnesota, but they couldn't get that stop either. Lions couldn't get the stop with 3:38 left, a little outside the window of the kind of last minute drive, but still, it went to the end of the game, gave it the field goal for the win. Bears, they got the stop, but only because they blocked the kick in the first Bears game. So
barely counts.
That barely counts. When they're playing Jacksonville got the ball with 3:50 left, needing a touchdown, didn't get the stop, but Green Bay got the ball back and got the game-winning field goal.
Yeah, but defense still not getting a stop when they need it. Still have not gotten one. Going backwards, still have not done one.
They're going against Houston. It wasn't late game. It was 8:11 left, but they could get the stop. Field goal for the drive, but Green Bay again gets the ball back for the winning field goal.
Mm-hmm.
And they're 26th DVOA offense. So far, only one of the teams has been a top 8.
And they've gotten 0 stops looking at all of these.
And then against the Rams, they got the stop, and the Rams needed a touchdown. They're 10th by DVOA. And against the Colts needing a touchdown, and they got the stop. So 2 stops and 1, 2, 3,
8.
4, 5, 6. So 75% success rate against.
Yeah, which is not very good.
Not 30 or 50.
Which is worse than the 66% that top 8 offenses get. And you're letting these up against bad offenses too. And I think part of that is you can't affect these opposing passers. And so even in obvious passing situations, you can't affect these opposing passers. And you're giving it up.
Actually, by the field goal percentage, that was 100. The 2 stops were when they needed touchdowns.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so that's something that they need to be better at in 2025, because it did feel like, even though on the whole the defense was pretty good this year, in those gotta-have-it situations, they were terrible.
Yeah, so that feeling was real. When going through, looking at the numbers and compared to like historical data, that feeling that the Packers can't get the stop when they need 2-0. Now, let's look at the flip side. When the Packers got on our offense and have to get it, versus Houston, game-winning field goal. Versus the Jags, game-winning field goal. Versus the Eagles week 1, only 22 seconds left. That's actually so low, it doesn't even fit the parameters. It's like when you had so little time and they needed a touchdown.
Yeah, I mean, you have to get a Hail Mary at that point.
Yeah. Versus the Bears, touchdown for the lead on the drive with 4:17 left. So not a last-minute drive, but they were able to get it. Versus the Lions, field goal to tie on a drive starting with 8:38 left. And versus the Bears, field goal for the lead on a drive with 1:55 left. So basically, they have 100% success on offense as well.
Yeah, but the defense is what we really need to focus on getting better in 2025. But I do think that if they could get some more playmakers along the defensive line who can force some more negative plays, they could do it.
Yeah, I think what you need sacks to get rid of these last minute drives. If you don't get to the quarterback,
it's you can't do it.
You get picked apart.
Yeah.
That's when it really hits you when you get, and you look at the playoff games like sacks.
It's so important. And turnovers, sacks and turnovers. That's been the difference. And the thing is, like, some people might point out, it's like, well, you know, in that first Bears game, you got a big sack on Caleb Williams, and then you gave up 2nd and 20 anyways. So, but you need to consistently be pressuring the quarterback on those last drives, and you should be able to, because you know that they're throwing the football. And so that's where it's like extra frustrating, is because, like, you know they're throwing the football. But anyway, that is another really important thing that the Packers need to get better at in 2025. But we have now gone over, 2024. We're kind of closing the book on it. We've gone over the things that the Packers did well that hopefully they can continue on into 2025. We've gone over the things that the Packers did really terribly and the ways that they need to fix that going into 2025. There are still, I think, though, just to wrap this up, so many things to be excited about in 2025. Still very excited about Jordan Love at the quarterback position. Still very excited about what this offense is capable of, especially if they can make a few moves there. Still really excited about what Hafley did with the defense, this past season, given the fact that, he was dealing with, at times, half a hand and the first year in the scheme for all these guys and transitioning from a 3-4 to a 4-3 for all these guys for the first time. I'm still really excited for 2025, Dad, aren't you?
Yeah, and we do not have that many free agents.
Nope, we got a lot of money.
And then we got some money. We're giving up, the vast majority of our starters back, and maybe able to sign a couple people.
Yeah, and it should be
hopefully
exciting.
Some big names. Goody, you said it's time for some urgency.
He did. He said it's time for some urgency. It's time to win some championships. But yeah, like he said, it's time for urgency. And so this is going to be a big offseason for the Packers. And with it being a big offseason for the Packers, we appreciate you coming and hanging out with us, because we will be here every single week of this offseason talking about free agency, which is going to be a big free agency for Green Bay. Talking about the draft, going to be a big draft for Green Bay, going to be a big draft in Green Bay. So that's going to be really exciting. But anyway, thank you again so much for listening to this first episode, breaking down 2024, kind of closing the book on it. Thank you again for listening. Now, please subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. It only takes you a second. Hit the button, whether that's, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Leave a comment, leave a review, tell a friend. We would really appreciate it. But anyway.
Yeah, and I'm sure every time you hit that button or tell a friend, you're going to get some kind of like dopamine hit. You'll feel great.
You feel good. It'll make you feel good to do something good. Yeah, so just do it for you if you're not going to do it for us. But anyway, thank you again so much for listening. We really appreciate it. We'll be back again next week starting to talk about, going forward, looking into the offseason. But until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.